So we're going to look more at while loops, in particular a thing we often do with loops, and that's count and do a loop a set number of times. So this is a general way of setting this up. We have a variable called I here, and we set I equal to 1. And then we say while I is less than some value, like let's say we want to count 10 times, we'd say y less than or equal to 10. Here they're using a variable n to store that. And we have the body of our loop, and then we have this increment. We're going to say I equals I plus 1 to add 1 through it to set this up. Now you can use I for, and I is used a lot for counter loops. You can use actually any variable you want. I is more traditional because in the old days we want an integer variable there. In old programming languages, any variable name that started with an I was automatically declared as an integer, and so lazy old programmers would just use the shortest one possible, I, as their counter variable, and that's still in existence today. So you see a lot of I's in these counter variables, but I will sometimes use other ones. So let's go over it now. Here's your zyBooks chapter 6 examples. I'm going to open up this counter variable and look at this. Now initially I'm going to get rid of this second counter loop here. Cut that out of here and just show you this first one. So we're going to say printing out starting loop, and when we're done with loop we'll say done with loop. And then we're going to have two variables. Max is how many times we're going to go through the loop, 10 times, and count, we're going to say count equal to 1. So this is very similar to their count, their I. So they set I equal to 1. We're going to set count equal to 1. And then we're going to say while count is less than or equal to max, they said while I is less than or equal to n. So that's very similar. I used the variables count and max. And then here I'm just going to print out in loop count is now count. And then I'm going to say count equals count plus 1 in the same way they said I equals I plus 1. So this is just a simple counter loop. If we run this, compile this, and run this, it'll count starting loop, in loop, count is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'll count all the way to 10 and say done with loop. So it counts starting at 1, because we have less than or and equal to, it'll count up to 10, including 10, our max, and it'll count by ones each time. Now you could switch this to different things. If you wanted to count by twos, you could change this to twos. If you wanted to count by something else. So let's say we wanted to go from 5 to 50, and we're going to count by 5s each time. 5, 10, 15, 20. So we're going to start at 5 and go to 50 by 5s. Compile that and run that. And here we're going 5, 10, 15, 20, all the way to 50. So what's nice about these counting loops is that you can set them up so that you can always set where you want to start, where you want to end, and how much you want to start to count by. Now you can also go backwards. I pasted in the second part of this loop, another loop here, I say starting loop. And now, this time we're going to set I equal to 1. So I'm setting I equal to 10 this time. And before I set I or count equal to 1. Now I'm setting, checking if I is greater than or is 0. And before I said while count is less than max. And here I'm going to say I equals I minus 1, and before I said count equals count plus 1. So again, here I'm using I because again we can use any variable in our loop for our counter as long as we use it consistently throughout. So I'm using I. I'm starting it at a large number and I'm subtracting 1 from it each time, and I'm going to keep looping as long as it's greater than 0. So now if I run this, the first loop counts from 1 to 10. Now this loop starts at 10 and goes down to 1. So these are two common loops, and these are good to have in your kind of programming toolbox, something you can grab and stuff. If you ever want to do something 10 times, 100 times, you can stick that something here instead of this print statement. and do that 10 times. Or sometimes we'll want to count backwards and have some variable that's counting backwards, and this loop will do the same thing, counting backwards. Okay, let's go back to zyBooks. So we've looked at this loop. They have another example here of savings calculations. So very similar. Let me open up the counting loop we had here so we can see how that works. So they're saying they're going to calculate how much savings you have. So they're going to ask you how many years you're going to have this money in savings, and read that into users' years. And then they're going to start and count the first year, second year, third year until they get up. Let's say we're going to save for 20 years. And so after 20 years, how much interest have we earned on our savings? So similar stuff, they have I equal 1, while I is less than user years, and I equals I plus 1. And this is what they're doing in the calculations. But again, that's very similar to what we have up here. Here we had count equal to 1, or I equal to 1, while I is less than user years, the number of years we want to loop, while count is less than or equal to max. So again, they're using I instead of count, and their max is what the user entered, so they have a different name for that. For the heart of their loop, they don't have this printout. They're doing this more complicated stuff. And then they do count equals count plus 1. They do I equals I plus 1 because they're using I here. And then what are they doing? They're saying print off the current savings. Sorry, my video just up. Okay, sorry, my video upload. Okay, here we go. So what are they doing inside the loop? They're printing out the current savings. And they ask the user, or how much money they have in their initial savings. I guess they have initial savings. They have $10,000, and then each time they're updating the current savings. So they're calculating how much the interest they get on the savings and adding that to their current savings and saving that. So again, this will loop through and say year 1, 2, 3. Here we're printing out these numbers, and here we're printing out the current savings. So different way. I mean, this is a way of actually using a counter loop, but they always have this initialization, this Boolean check for the max, and an increment or decrement. So you should be going through. There's some nice examples here. The more you practice loops, the more familiar you will get with them. So loops are a thing to practice as much as you can. Keep doing that. Here's another example where rather than counting by 1, you could count by 4s to do every election year. So go through that. More examples of while loops here that you can do. So try these different examples out. And here's another election year one. Now, here's another operator that we'll see a lot. So we do this I equals I plus 1 or count equals count plus 1 so much that there's a shortcut to that. We can say just plus plus I, and that'll take its place. So rather than saying I equals I plus 1 in a loop, we can just say plus plus I, and that's just a shortcut. So there's actually a number of ways we can say I equals I plus 1, I plus equals 1, or just plus plus 1. So those are all ways of adding 1 to I. Now the book going forward will tend to use this a lot. I will also use this one, so you'll see this and this back and forth. I often find beginning programmers have trouble remembering this one, so it's good to see that one, but it's also good to remember this is what it does, and you can do it either way. Similar when we're decrementing, you can do as a minus minus I, you can do to decrement things. So it shows you some loops here with this plus plus, some examples, so just go through that. Why don't you try the star printer and see what you can do. They have some sample code they want here. You should just take that code and copy and paste it in here. And it's not going to work. It's going to run forever. So you're going to have to modify the code. What they want you to do is they have this line to print out 1 star, and they have the number of stars to print out equals 12, so that now you're supposed to change the loop so it prints out 12 stars. So see if you can modify this so it'll print out 12 stars. Then you can pause this video and keep going and play it afterwards, and I'll show you a solution. Okay, let's take a look at this. So again, if we just put their solution in here and run it, it's going to cause some problems. It's just going to run forever. So it'll sit here and program never ended, infinite loop. So let's look at what we want to do here. Right now we set while number printed is not equal to number of stars, we print out a star, and then we don't change anything here. So none of these variables ever change. So what we want to do is if we've printed out one star and we want to print out 12 stars, we want to keep doing this until the number printed equals the number they have. So I'm going to rewrite this and say, while the number of stars is less than a number printed is less than the number of stars. And then we also have to remember to increment that. Inside a loop, we always have to do something to change the loop characteristics. So I'm going to say number of stars equals number of printed plus 1. Again, this is one of those things I could actually say num printed plus plus or plus plus num printed to add 1 to it rather than writing this all out. So when I print out a star, I'm going to say num printed equals num printed plus 1. Add 1 to the number printed and then check. Have I printed out enough? And then if not, print out another star, add 1 to it, check, and loop through there. Now if I run this, I'm getting closer, but not quite there. So they wanted us to print out 12 stars and I printed out 11 stars. Can you fix that? Okay, did you try to fix that? So here I'm going to print out when number printed is 11, I print out a star. But when number printed is 12, this is not less than or equal to, and it won't print out the 12th star. So I'm going to change that to less than or equal to, and then run this again. And now it should print out the right number of stars. They tried out with num stars equals 12, 25, and even when num stars equals 0, where they're not printing out any stars. So they've done that. So that wraps up this exercise, this unit. Next, we're going to be looking at another way of counting with a different type of loop called a for loop.